water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years passed and my brother and I discovered the new Avatar, an airbender named Aang. And although his airbending skills are great, he has a lot to learn before he's ready to save anyone. But I believe Aang can save the world.
Surprise! Yeah, sorry to lure you into a false sense of security there, but nope, you are not watching a full episode on this channel. I'm very sorry. I just did that to get a little bit more visual flair in this episode, in this video, but admittedly, I'm hoping this video doesn't get taken down or flagged because, you know, copyright and stuff, and I don't really know how to fight that, so I'm just trying to add a little visual flair. But if for whatever reason this does get flagged, let's consider this the official start. Hey again, welcome back to the Avatar Vlogs. This is episode 12, The Storm, and coming right off what many people consider to be the worst episode of the series, this one is often thrown around in the debate of what is considered to be the best in the series. There's a couple contenders that are, you know, often vary for what's considered the best, and I personally have my own pick, which we'll get to later. But watching this again, I can't say it's my favorite episode, but it is a really good episode, and it's probably by far and away the most important episode, because not only does it mostly because it finally solidifies and explains the backstories of not only Aang but Zuko and how they're connected, you know, that whole theme of connection. So yeah, this is a good episode, and right off the bat, this is an episode where I was starting to notice things that I never noticed like any of the previous times I watched through it. So for instance, the episode starts with Aang having a dream sequence. You can always tell because they're kind of done with a bit of a soft focus and a bit of a sepia tone filter. But it's Aang flying happily on Appa, as you do. Any chance to show Appa is always a happy one. You know, he's just happy, and then he looks to his left and he sees Sokka flying on his air glider, and then he looks to his right and he sees Katara flying on a giant Momo. Now, that is such a goofy image, but it's such an image of pure happiness that I kind of love it. And not only that, like, not only is it an image of happiness, but it also kind of does work with a bit of development in like visual storytelling, because these are all people, these are the two people who he holds most dear in his life, and they're partaking in traditions that are known only to the air nomads. So it's kind of a way of not only cementing how important they are to him as kind of his family, but it's also him trying to project needing to hold on to his air nomad culture through these two closest people to him. And I don't know, I never thought about that the first few times I watched it, but just thinking about that now, like that was an amazing image, just them flying and how it's Aang trying to hold on to what he holds dear. And not surprisingly, the dream goes bad where they careen into the ocean, and then Aang wakes up from the nightmare. So Aang's been having a few recurring nightmares where something like this is happening. He's usually flying, and then suddenly he's caught up in a storm, and it's been waking everybody up. I do kind of love how when everyone wakes up, Sokka wakes up with his boomerang and a knife. He's like, "Have we been captured again?" Which is kind of funny how, yes, these guys have been captured quite a bit. So decent startup. Not surprisingly, the gang realizes that they are out of food and money, so they go to a market to try and get supplies, but again, they have no money, so they're not too sure what to do. Sokka overhears a fisherman and his wife talking, and the wife doesn't want to go out to sea because she thinks a storm is coming, and the husband is saying, well, you know, the fish aren't going to catch themselves, so he's willing to pay someone double whatever she would make, and Sokka, hearing that, immediately applies for the job. And Katara and Aang are a little concerned that he's going out, but Sokka's like, I took the job, I can't just walk out of it now because of a little weather. And this is also the first time that Aang is kind of confronted with the notion of running away from his responsibilities. Now, we've talked about this before a little bit, but usually whenever Aang is introduced as the Avatar, it's usually met with either overwhelming praise, mild acceptance slash indifference, like the Avatar's back, but people are kind of neutral about it. This is the first time I think that people have actively been revulsed by the fact he's here. Not so much that he is here, but rather he did disappear for 100 years, which is true. He did. I'm sorry. I don't know if that helped. But he's disappeared for like 100 years. So, not surprisingly, even though he is back, he did run away from his duties for so long that, it's not good. And that's kind of a theme that's going to carry throughout the show a lot. How, even though Aang is, it's sort of a theme that carries out through the show where your past is not the only thing that defines you. It is what you do now. That's always a very common message in kids media. Your past doesn't really define who you are entirely. It's what you do now. But at the same time, you can't just pretend that the past never happened. You can't just completely run away from the things you did, whether good or bad. You do have to confront what you're doing now with what you did, and you have to come to the resolution with it. But, that's a bit later. So, Aang's feeling bad, and the storm starts to hit, so him and Katara seek some shelter. And he goes into the fact that when he was 12 years old, he was living happily at the Southern Air Temple with all of his friends, when suddenly the monks took him into a room and they explained that he is, in fact, the Avatar. And normally, I like this little bit of world building. Normally, the Avatar is announced when the person turns 16, but they sense there's some danger on the horizon. And even though Aang is, in many respects, he's not ready for this, they need him now desperately. So most of the monks want to encourage Aang to get extra training, and they want to separate him from the air temple so he can learn all these skills that he needs, whereas his father figure, Monk Gyatso, really doesn't want that to happen. He wants Aang to stay and have a normal childhood. Not surprisingly, that's kind of not very feasible when he has such a high responsibility. And on top of that, his friends start to alienate him because, they think they don't know what to do. He's like suddenly the most important person in the world. He's not a kid anymore. And not wanting to be separated from the life he knew, and being a 12-year-old boy, he gets on Appa and he flies away. He got caught in a storm, and then he woke up seeing Katara, which again is funny, knowing the fact that the last memory Aang had was him running away from home. He gets caught in a storm. He wakes up in Katara, and the first thing he does is, "Hey, are you gonna go penguin sledding with me?" Like, he's a kid, I get it, but it is very funny in that regard. And meanwhile, while that's going on, we're getting Aang's backstory. We're also getting Zuko's backstory. Now, Zuko wants the ship to keep following the Avatar, but Iroh is saying how there's a storm on the horizon, that they shouldn't pursue this, and this starts to alienate Zuko from the crew because they feel he's just being a spoiled prince brat who cares nothing for anybody. And as Linkara would say, "Time for backstory." And Iroh explains that what happened years ago is Zuko was a young man. He was the prince of the Fire Nation after all. He wanted to go into a war meeting to hear what was going on because, he says he wants to be a good leader to the Fire Nation. But while he's in there, he discovers there was a plan to basically lead a whole battalion of Fire Nation soldiers, like new recruits, as lambs to the slaughter for a mission that would not really benefit them, but they were going to lead like lambs to the slaughter, basically. And Zuko spoke out about this, saying, you can't do that, that's wrong. But in doing so, he showed great disrespect and was challenged to a duel. He thought he was going to fight the general who he spoke out against, but instead he actually has to fight his father, the Fire Lord, because he spoke out in the Fire Lord's war room, and therefore has to fight him. Zuko outright refused, and as punishment, not only for his disrespect, he was burned on the left side of his face. That's where he gets that that big scar from, and that's why he was banished, and with the only caveat of returning is to capture the Avatar, which, let's be honest, was an empty threat at the time because the Avatar was missing. They had no idea, so ultimately it was basically a hopeless mission until Aang did show up, and now Zuko has hope. And that's how these backstories are intertwined. It's about it's kind of brilliant to me. Like it's hard to explain exactly how it works, but not only are these two kids, like Zuko's 17, I think, or maybe he's a teenager, okay? I think he's 17, and Aang is a boy, but they were both people who, in varying degrees of responsibility, were kind of in a way punished for it. So Aang did not seek out his responsibility. It was thrust upon him. He wanted to hold on to his childhood innocence and ran away, and he's punished with guilt, but at the same time, he's more responsible for people's lives being destroyed. Like, he's the hero, but he's ultimately responsible for far more lives being destroyed in running away from his responsibilities. Whereas Zuko, on the other hand, he sought out his responsibility. He wanted to be a good prince for the Fire Nation. Through his childhood innocence, he took the noble route and wanted to save lives, and was punished for it. Now, I don't know what that really is saying about, like, maybe the state of the world or the worldview, but I love the parallel how the hero caused suffering and he is trying to fix it. He from a place of selfishness has to go to selflessness, whereas the villain came from a place of selflessness, was punished, and became the villain. Like, there's so many layers you can take from these backstories and these characters and the way they intertwine with each other. And honestly, I really recommend you see this episode. Like, you should watch the previous ones, obviously. You should watch all these episodes, but this one is by far and away the most important for the show. Showing these backstories, showing how these characters' lives intertwine, showing just great complexity, great subtlety. And even though this episode isn't my favorite, this is another one where it is far better than I remember as a kid. Like, whenever I always saw it on, like, number 2, number 3, or number 1 on, like, best episodes list, I never fully agreed, but now I see where it came from. Like, this is just brilliant writing, and it went so underappreciated by me for such a long time. And not only that, but their stories kind of intertwine in the episode because the storm hits, and it's a typhoon, and so Aang and Katara have to go out and save the old man and Sokka, and then Zuko has to keep his crew safe from the storm basically turning over the ship, and he even personally saves one of his own crew member from falling when he very easily could have ignored it and just went to pursue the Avatar. There's also this look, which it's hard to describe, but Aang and Zuko share this look, kind of a mutual understanding and sadness that was actually very well done. But even taking, like, let's take a step back from the heavier moments and go into the comedy, because this show is good with its comedy too. There's 2 very funny lines. Actually, I will say the fisherman and his wife are 2 very funny characters. I actually kind of wish they showed up again. The fisherman's very funny because he's an old man, and it's implied he's over 100 years old, like he's been there the entire war. So he has dramatic lines like, "Oh, so I guess I imagined the last 100 years of war and suffering." But then there's moments where he says, "I'll hire someone and I'll pay him double what you earn," to his wife. And then Sokka says, "Hey, this guy's paying double. Who told you that? Where'd you hear that?" But the 2 best lines is when the old woman comes in to ask Aang and Katara for help. And Aang says, "I'm going." Katara, "I'm going with you too." And the old woman's like, "I'm staying here." Like, she doesn't want to go into the storm, which was very funny. And then you cut to Sokka and the old man. Sokka's like, "I'm too young to die." And the old guy's like, "I'm not, but I still don't wanna." So yeah, this... and then the episode ends on a very obvious but still poignant note where everybody's reunited, everybody's safe. Aang has kind of come to terms with his past and what he needs to do for the future. And Sokka says, "Hey, look, the storm stopped." Very obvious, but still very poignant. A very poignant ending to a episode that holds up way, way better than I ever thought it possibly could. So, yeah, this was a great episode. I'm so And especially coming off the Great Divide, I am so glad that this episode came next. And the next one is also a pretty good one. It's one of my personal favorites. But until then, I'll see you in the next one, and onwards and upwards, my friends.